This episode of New Politics was released on the 15th of November, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
Following on from the 50th anniversary of the dismissal during the week, 4-year parliamentary terms are back on the agenda. Why did Chris Minns allow a neo-Nazi rally to go ahead in front of the New South Wales Parliament? And the November killing season. Will Susan Lee still be the leader of the Liberal Party at the end of the year? I'm Edie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis, and all of this is coming up in a tremendous episode of New Politics.
Whenever there's discussions about the dismissal of the Whitlam government from 1975, there's also the discussions about Australia making the move to the Republic or making changes to the Constitution. And the only change to the Constitution that relates to the dismissal occurred in 1977, and that was to ensure that a senator who resigns from the Parliament has to come from the party that initially elected them into Parliament. And I guess we could talk about the Bjelke-Petersen involvement at that time, but that might take a few hours, so let's not go there. But aside from that...
I will say that Bjelke-Petersen and Tom Lewis, who was Premier of New South Wales, no relation, should have been arrested and shot. Maybe not shot, but arrested.
Should have been arrested, but...
Act of treason.
But aside from that constitutional change in 1977, that's it. And this week, Anthony Albanese and John Howard actually agreed on something, and that was to make the move from 3-year terms to 4-year parliamentary terms. And this, to me, makes a lot of sense. Every state and territory in Australia runs on a 4-year term. Some are fixed and some are not. But federally, it's pretty much the first year of the term that the government settles in, and especially if they're a changed government and they've just come in as a new government. The second year is doing the work of government, and then the third year, well, you start campaigning for the next election, hoping that what you've achieved in that second year of government might be enough to get you re-elected. And I just don't think that's long enough. But the issue is that there needs to be a referendum on making this sort of change, and only 8 of the 45 referenda questions have been passed. And then I suspect that if you are going to have a referendum on just this one tiny issue, well, why not bank a whole lot of other changes that need to be made? Or better still, why not come up with a completely new constitution that reflects the 21st century instead of the 1890s when Australia's current constitution was written up?
The one advantage to 3-year terms is that it meant we got 1 year less of Morrison. Morrison, with 4 years, would have done even more damage. Having said that, we can't even say we got less of Whitlam because they kept forcing him to elections. And the other thing too with 3-year terms, they're not really 3 years. Very few governments have run the 3 years. The Prime Minister will try and time an election, and the Prime Minister is the only one who can call an election. The Governor-General can't, the Attorney-General can't, the Leader of the Opposition can't, the parties can't. It's the Prime Minister, which is an anomaly in that the Prime Minister is not mentioned in the Constitution, but that's a whole other debate, and we might get in a constitutional expert to talk about it. But you're really looking at 2.5 years. And those of you who've done management roles know that if you're on a big project, if you're on a nation-building project, 2.5 years isn't enough. 5 years in Britain, I think, is too long. I think you do need to be held to account by the people, which is what elections are, essentially. Are you doing a good enough job to hold the trust of the people and to make sure that you're being held to account by the one thing that really matters? But 3 years is too short. And there's no real argument against going to 4 years or any period of time, really. But 4 years to me does seem... New South Wales, we've had some shocker governments in the last 10 or 12 years from both sides. Yet the state still powers along. The sky hasn't fallen in.
Well, I just looked outside. The sun is still up there.
Yep. And there are other accountabilities too. As leader, you've got to hold the confidence of your cabinet. By-elections happen for unavoidable reasons, sometimes good, very rarely good reasons. It's illness or death or, hello, New South Wales, arrests. Family circumstances that require more time at home, scandal. Sometimes the two are conflated, but that's a different issue again.
Well, Sydney is the crime capital of Australia.
Oh, yes. But the point is that 3 years can be shortened. Whitlam gets 2 terms in Parliament, but it's only over 2.5 years or something, because he gets forced back to the 74 election, which he didn't need to be forced back to, which would have probably prevented 75. And with Suzanne Lee as leader, for the moment anyway, you've got a better chance of having an opposition who will at least look at that sensibly and say, yep, this is something we can support, rather than a Peter Dutton who would have rejected it just so he could beat the Labor Party,
Well, he was
own the
Mr. No.
Libs.
Say no to everything. Tony
Yeah.
Abbott, say no to
Yeah,
everything.
Tony, yeah. Both of whom became terrible. Well, Dutton never got a chance, but Tony Abbott was a very unsuccessful prime minister. So there's lessons in there too. But
Yeah. But the other point is the 4-year term shouldn't just be about politics or partisanship. I think it should be about governments just working in a much better way. And at the moment, the 3-year election cycle, well, it almost keeps the parties on a constant campaign footing. And I don't know whether 4 years would change that, but pretty much the day after an election, well, the winning party starts planning for the next election. And that means that there's less time on governing, there's more time for getting up to political games. And it almost leaves no time at all for serious reform or long-term planning. It's not just the politicians, but a longer cycle would give departments and the ministers more time to plan, to consult and actually deliver outcomes. It would allow for genuine national debates on big issues such as energy transition, although with the Liberal Party you just never know what they'll do on energy, but housing, defence, taxation. And instead of getting the short-term rubbish where all we get are the sound bites to get the governments through pretty much to the next parliamentary sitting time, we might get something more reasonable happening. And business groups, they actually like the idea of 4-year terms. And you think the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, they pretty much do whatever the business wants and they want it. So why not bring it in? Because for business, it creates this policy stability and predictability. And David, how many times we hear from business wanting to see the election outcome in that 3rd year of the term before they start making critical decisions? They also, look, we'll wait until we know the result of the election. So I think that would be a good outcome for business. And then there's a cost of all of this. The 2022 federal election cost $522 million. I assume the 2025 election would have cost around the same. So if you're having elections every 4 years, well, over a 12-year period, that's how much money you'd be saving because you're having 3 elections instead of 4. But I think overall this would be a good thing to do. And just getting back to Gough Whitlam for a moment, he actually suggested having all of these elections on the same day. So federal, state, territory, local council, all of these elections on the same day, similar to what happens in the United States. And there's probably too many things that need to fall into place for that to happen in Australia, legally and technically, but fixed 4-year terms for the federal government, at least, I think that's the way to go.
But having everything on the same day in Australia is a bit easier because in the States you elect most of your public servants. What they call the district attorney or the public prosecutor is here, the public defenders here, you elect your sheriffs, you elect your dog catchers, you elect your librarians, So in the States it's a very complex thing, but they manage to do it on the same day. I guess having non-compulsory voting helps because some people will go in and vote for the offices that interest them and not for the ones that don't. Here, of course, we only elect the government. So the government can then appoint your public prosecutors and your librarians and of course there's processes anyway for the public service to do most of that. And there's due processes and correct procedures and what have you. So it's fairly open. And although every now and then, of course, people get snuck into jobs that they don't necessarily have the skills nor qualifications for. So in Australia, we'd be running 3 elections in that there'd be state, federal and local. It's a bigger job in, say, New South Wales or Victoria than it is in Western Australia because of the number of local councils and the number of seats at a state and federal level. But I think the AEC could handle it, and I think it would probably make things a little bit fairer too, in that if you get halfway through a government's term and there's a state election, despite the fact that everyone says state elections have no bearing on what's happening federally and vice versa, there is backlash. I'm not voting for these working conservative because the working conservative government at a state level put in a new toll or something. So I'm going to vote Conservative workers. I think you get a bit less of that too, and you might just get governments voted on their merits rather than the purely emotional, I'm not voting for those ever again type thing. And that's not to say that I know that there are listeners out there who've sworn never to vote for a particular party again, and that's absolutely fine and even understandable. I'm talking about the swinging voters, I know a lot of listeners are, but those who don't really think too hard about it, who I know none of our listeners are, and who just vote according to what they saw in the headlines of the newspapers the day before, or overheard on Sky News, or got from social media. It might stop a bit of that. It may not either. But yeah, having them all on the same day. And we have had rare, but it does happen, anomalies where we go and vote for local council. It's all very good. And then 6 weeks later, we vote for the state government. Again, New South Wales has fixed dates, so it's easy to manage against that when you're doing the local. But in other states where you don't have that and political circumstances go wrong, for example, and the Premier is forced to an early election, and suddenly you've got people going back to the polling booth, and people tend to resent that. But you get another sausage. It only costs $2.50 and it helps local school or CWA or what have you.
Well, you and I would want to have an election pretty much every weekend, just like the Bunnings sausage sizzle. But generally, we've agreed that the idea of 4-year terms, that would be a good idea. So that's done and dusted. Let's do it. But we've got the same old problem that we'll always have, the Constitution. Because even to change one word of the Constitution does need a referendum. So to change from 3 years to 4 years, unless it's a typo or something like that, they're not going to go to a referendum just for that sort of thing. But to change even a couple of words, you've got to have a referendum. So that change from 3 years to 4 years, that's in Section 28 of the Constitution. We do need a referendum. You've got to go to the people, yes or no. What do you think about this? And that's not even taking into account the Senate requirements. So there would be another series of questions as well. And this debate about 4-year terms, well, it's not new. It's actually been around since the 1920s, and every government since that time has either put it into the too hard basket or the why bother basket, because it's actually a very simple change, but it's very difficult to achieve constitutionally. And we've complained this quite a few times before, David, that the Australian Constitution is like a lump of concrete. And it was written 125 years ago during a different era, and it was probably made so rigid to try and solidify that relationship with empire, but it was made with impossible rules. That idea of the double majority, which is the majority of the people in the majority of the states, that's almost impossible. And you probably, what I'm going to suggest is that you probably need a constitutional convention over 5 or 6 years or something like that, and probably make it similar to the French Constitution, which essentially is a 2-tier constitution where you have all the important bits that need to go to a full referendum if you ever want to change it. And then there's all the other minor administrative changes, like going from a 3-year term to a 4-year term. You just leave that up to Parliament. Maybe a joint sitting of Parliament to pass these sorts of issues. But the upshot is, whatever you end up doing, the current constitution is just not fit for purpose. It's no longer useful in the 21st century and beyond. And fixed 4-year terms, well, that's a start, but there's just a whole lot of other things that need to be fixed up too.
I have argued in the past and still somewhat believe that the Australian Constitution is a brilliant document in that it has lasted 100 or so years. They kept it vague enough that it could weather the change. The writers of the Constitution, mostly Garron and Deakin, knew that the country was going to change. Now, I don't think they knew how it was going to change. They would have told you that it's going to remain resolutely British nation, part of the empire then, but perhaps the empire will change. There'd already been things to change the empire, and only 27 years later, you get the Balfour Declaration basically saying that the larger nations that tend to white people can look after themselves. Still members of the British Commonwealth, and then the Statute of Westminster in 31, which says, no, Britain really doesn't want you. But they couldn't have predicted, I don't think, the climate issues we have. They couldn't have predicted multiculturalism. In fact, they were all very much in favour of white Australia in what was essentially a multicultural country anyway. But they couldn't have predicted the expansion of university education, that the Australian people were different. And the Australian of 2025 is completely different to the Australian of 1901. Now, they would have expected that. They weren't stupid men, but they wouldn't have expected, because nobody would have. And I think, and they made it hard to change because they didn't want the volatility of not having a lawful document that was stable, that could be changed on a whim to suit a despot. Could you imagine Morrison being able to change the Constitution at will?
I think that's what he was aiming to do.
He was trying to, yeah. He couldn't work out how to do it. Or Abbott would have worked to Goff's advantage too. But it's better that we have some kind of control and balance. It is time to start to think about amending the Constitution. Now, we did try Indigenous recognition. The voice to Parliament would have taken a big step towards a modern, appropriate constitution. But the racists got hold of it and the government did it. As a result, that's gone for the time being. Look at the Republic. Last time we spoke about that was 26 years ago. And Anthony Albanese said, now's not the time. Now, when, if not now, when? Okay, the Queen dies, you don't do it then. That's maybe a bit tasteless. But
well, the day after, that would be okay.
Yeah. Let the wake finish. But with the Queen's passing, that would have been the time to say to Charles, it's not you, nothing personal. This is purely business. We're still best buddies. Good luck with it. One less thing to have to worry about. See you later, mate. But again, and as we mentioned before, Labor has got too timid to even suggest something that the majority of people want. And with a weak opposition, now's the time to try this, while the opposition are trying to work out. Because you get the Greens on your side with this stuff, you'd get the Teals on your side with this stuff, and you could render, and this is another mistake of the Voice campaign, they took too much notice, or they allowed too much notice to be taken of Dutton. And with a united Parliament, it would get through. It would take work. It might take a little bit of agility. Oh, this argument's not working. Let's get another argument, which again was a fault of the Voice. Once they started on the path, they would not diverge. And that was a big problem. So in the end, if I was the Prime Minister, I'd be looking at next term to bring in a republic. And it can be a small, minor change. Yep, we just scrap the stationery that says Governor General and call him President or what have you. We might be able to find a safer term than President, which tends to trigger...
Gun shearer.
Yep, the gun.
Head honcho.
Yep, the ringer. The ringer looks around. Yeah, but yeah, it could be done. And yeah, you'd hopefully be able to sneak in some kind of Indigenous recognition too, to say, look, let's grow up as a nation. Let's be adults. Let's look at the actual figures, not the figures that Sky News are telling you about Indigenous privilege. Let's actually look at it. Let's shut Jacinta Price and Lydia Thorpe and Noel Pearson up through, not by telling them they can't have an opinion, of course they can, but showing everyone how their opinion doesn't accord with what is right.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
Outside State Parliament, almost 70 neo-Nazis from the White Australia group,
Bloody order! Bloody order!
armed with a banner that reads "Abolish the Jewish lobby," and all of it approved by police.
The Jewish lobby is destroying our nation.
They claim the lobby is controlling the government and want hate speech laws abolished.
They bribe our politicians. They coerce our politicians.
It's obviously shameful that these people feel that they have the right to demonstrate in such a despicable, hateful way, spewing division and racism on the streets of Sydney.
The neo-Nazis applied to protest ahead of time, making clear their intention to rally against the Jewish lobby, and they were given the green light by police 10 days ago. Only the Commissioner and the Premier had no idea.
Last weekend, there was a neo-Nazi rally organised outside the New South Wales Parliament where around 60 men, all dressed in black uniforms, holding up a huge banner that read "Abolish the Jewish Lobby" and hurling out messages of white supremacy. And this was a rally that had been authorised by the New South Wales Police, and they did nothing about it. And this is despite all the brand new hate speech laws and an entire intelligence network that's supposedly monitoring these extremists. Police officers just stood by while all of these chants of white supremacy were being made on the streets of Sydney. And the New South Wales Police know who these people are. It's the far-right National Socialist Network. They're anti-immigration, anti-LGBTQI, they're Islamophobic, they're anti-Semitic, they're white supremacists. Sounds a little bit like the New South Wales Police Force there. But just a few weeks before, police commissioners in New South Wales did say that they were tracking these same people and said that they are very violent people and capable of extreme violence. And this is a guiding principle that we keep talking about, David, but we do have to accept that people do have a right to protest, even if we don't like that protest. But when we have a look at different groups, there's obviously different treatments for different groups. And just the week before, we talked about it last week on the New Politics podcast, that people at a pro-Palestine march in Darling Harbour were beaten up and arrested by police. And whenever the pro-Palestine groups want to hold an event, the police reject their application and then they have to go off to the Supreme Court to assert their right to hold a protest, and usually that right is upheld. And the issue is that none of this happened with this neo-Nazi rally. So the message in New South Wales is people who are anti-immigration, anti-LGBTQI, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic and white nationalists, well, that's all okay. But if you want to protest against the fascism and Zionism that is causing a genocide in another country and exporting military parts to the state of Israel, or if you want to protest about climate inaction, well, the New South Wales government will create laws to stop you, and the New South Wales police are going to arrest you and beat you up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a Presbyterian church just across the road from Parliament House, which last time I looked was a place of worship. The synagogue is not far, and of course you got St Mary's Cathedral right around the corner. Now I'm not quite sure of the distances, but I know at least one of those buildings. Oh, you've got the Anglican church in the square there too.
Well, according to the current legislation, which was knocked out by the Supreme Court in New South Wales to say that it was unconstitutional, it is the vicinity of the legislation. So that
at least 3 and possibly 4. And again, okay, the court did knock it out rightly. But if you're going to use it as a yardstick, particularly a group who's saying exterminate the Jewish lobby, what does that mean? The Zionist lobby is one thing, but Jews aren't necessarily Zionists and Zionists aren't necessarily Jews. There are Jewish Zionists, of course, but there are also a lot of Christian Zionists and there are also a lot of atheist Zionists. So knocking out the Jewish, what was the wording? Remove the Jewish lobby, I think is probably code, and you can get rid of the I, the H, the L, the O, the 2 Bs and the Y for what they really mean. And that's disgraceful and disgusting and needs to be condemned. And the citizens of New South Wales, particularly the Jewish citizens of New South Wales, don't need to be confronted with that. No arrests, interestingly. It's good if they were peaceful. Peaceful demonstrations are what we should be aiming for. But I wonder if they were peaceful because they didn't need to be violent, because the police were aiding and abetting. I'm hoping this isn't the case. I was not there, of course.
But I think the big point is that the law should be applied equally. But in this case, it's not. And police action should be applied equally. And it's
Did
the same
anyone
sort of,
nearly lose an eye?
Yeah, that's right. But it's also the same pattern. Whenever there's a peaceful protest for Palestine or over climate action, there's always police agitation. The right-wing media gets up in arms about it. Chris Minns goes on to 2GB to talk about it. And the there's always pepper spray that's held in the pocket of these police officers, ready to be used, and the riot squad is always half a minute away, just around the corner, ready to agitate and arrest people. But there was just no problem for these neo-Nazis. And it happens every time. We had that situation where the former Greens candidate, Hannah Thomas, she was seriously injured at one of these protests. And at least the police officer who did that is now facing prosecution, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. And if you're going to use pepper spray against people who are protesting against genocide or protesting about climate change, well, use that same pepper spray against neo-Nazis. And I'm not condoning the use of pepper spray, but if you're going to use it against these people, well, use it against neo-Nazis as well. Get the riot squad to punch people out just like you did in Darling Harbour. And I think we just have to look at the evidence. And there'd be a lot of pro-Nazi sympathy within the New South Wales police force, and based on them condoning this sort of activity whenever it's on display. And just a few weeks ago, we had the mural created by Jeremy Smith called Queer Sydney, A History of LGBTQIA+, installed outside the Surrey Hills police station and just around the corner from Darlinghurst. And that was removed because of complaints from some of the police officers who work at that station. Now, I'm not saying that all members of the New South Wales police force would be like that, but it's just an explanation of why similar activities in New South Wales are treated so differently by the New South Wales police force.
Oh, if you read D.H. Lawrence's Kangaroo, published in 1934, or Andrew Moore's Secret Army and the Premier, there's been a few since, but this Kangaroo ends with a riot in Hyde Park. Lawrence knew what was going on in New South Wales. And again, you're right, it's not all police. And I will always defend the hardworking, honest police officer who does the job of managing crime in lawful and ethical ways. And there are a lot of those, and maybe even some of our listeners, and I welcome them and say hello. But we can't have right-wing ideologues. And again, if your local police officer votes for the Liberal Party or the National Party and is otherwise a reasonable and lawful, I've got no problem with that either. Police are allowed to have opinions, but they can't have opinions that favour one group over another. The law has to be applied equally or it's not a law. It's that simple. And we shouldn't have to say that. Chris Minns shouldn't have to be told that. And you'd think Chris Minns would be appalled by a right wing and would do all in his power to stop it, like he tried to stop the March Across the Bridge, like he tried to stop the various protests that affected other things.
Well, I'm just wondering what's going on with Chris Minns because, well, he's the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns. He said that he's outraged by the neo-Nazi rally in Sydney. He made up some bullshit excuse about his office not knowing about the neo-Nazi rally because it was happening on a weekend. And he always seems to know about the pro-Palestine and climate action protests, and they always happen on a weekend too. So he's using this event now as an excuse to create even more police powers and even rework the legislation for more police powers around places of worship that was knocked out by the Supreme Court, even though the Supreme Court ruled that similar rules that he introduced at the beginning of the year under those false pretences were unconstitutional. And the thing is that New South Wales already has got adequate hate speech laws that could have been used to stop this neo-Nazi rally, but the government and the police chose not to use them. So you don't actually need new powerful laws and possibly unconstitutional laws if you're not prepared to use those laws that can already deal with the issue. And David, I'm just starting to get really worried about Chris Minns as the New South Wales Premier. He's just a young guy. He's only 46, so he's not that experienced. And it might be a case where he's deferring to the more experienced and the older people within the New South Wales police force, and he might actually feel a little bit insecure about his own position within the government. And we have to remember that the New South Wales Labor government is in a minority government position, but trying to get more
uniquely amongst the Labor governments in the states, in the other states.
That's right. But trying to get more extreme powers when you've already got the powers to deal with these sorts of issues and you don't use those powers, well, that's not a sign of good leadership. It's a sign of extremism. And we've said this before, that Chris Minns is not really a Labor type of leader. And if I was Chris Minns, well, I'd be looking over his shoulder over the next few months because there's a lot of Labor MPs in the New South Wales Parliament who are not very happy about this sort of behaviour and Chris Minns' leadership on these sorts of issues.
He removes Jodie Mackay, on the argument that she lost what was really an unwinnable election for Labor at that point. It was a by-election, and so it didn't actually affect the Labor count in the parliament. But he removes her, and she'd been quite effective in reforming Labor and making it more in line with modern thinking. Comes in, and really he's not that much of a difference to Dominic Perrottet, who was the last Premier of New South Wales, who was disastrous. Perrottet was part of an extreme Catholic faction, Opus Dei and all of that. Now Minns isn't, I'm not saying Minns is a part of that, but he hasn't really shown himself to be a Labor Premier, just a middle manager who's happy to go along with the status quo and keep shoveling money to developers and contractors and strip New South Wales of its assets. We were talking earlier about Whitlam in New South Wales, and don't forget Neville Wran, a problematic figure, no doubt, but always had his eye on what the working class needed and what the people of New South Wales needed, knowing that's what wins you elections. Bob Carr, problematic in terms of his politics. He was quite right-wing, and never really convinced people that he was a man with working-class tastes. But he was authentic in his own way. He didn't try and hide behind it. The one time he went to a football game, it got to half-time and he thought it was over. And they said, no, there's still another 40 minutes. He pulled a face and went back in. They didn't try that again. And
Chris Minns is even more extreme than Bob Carr.
Carr argued with the unions he didn't agree with, but he didn't stop protests he didn't like. He didn't favour the absolute opposite of his beliefs, and he remained fairly consistent in what he said, and he told you what he was about. Minns, really, we don't know where he stands, except we now know that he will accept anti-Semitic rallies. And just quick side, where was Gillian Segal, the anti-Semitic envoy in all this? I've heard nothing from her. The rumour has is that she's been very quietly removed, put on gardening leave, but I don't know that's true. But I'd have thought that if a bunch of neo-Nazis with anti-Jewish signs popped out, you'd have something to say as the envoy to anti-Semitism.
Well, the other rumour is that they're on the same side of politics.
And there's that as well.
We're getting to the last parts of November in federal parliament, and it's also known as the killing season for leaders of political parties. Now, there's absolutely nothing special about the month of November, but it is the last chance for a political party to remove a poorly performing leader before the end of the parliamentary term and start the next political year afresh. Now, there is one more week of sitting for the year. The Liberal Party was actually in Canberra this week having that meeting to work out their policy on net zero emissions by 2050, and I think they're actually doing their best to make sure that they do not win the next election and then the next election after that one and maybe the one after that and the one after that. But the speculation is that Susan Lee will be gone by the end of this year, and all the bets are on the so-called dream team of Angus Taylor and Tim Wilson as the new leadership team. It might be a dream team, but it sounds like an actual nightmare to me. But they have finalised their resistance to net zero by 2050. They've also rejected having quotas to get more women into Parliament, even though the electorate has told them, yes, we do want net zero by 2050, and yes, we do want the Liberal Party to have 50% women as soon as possible. So what do, David? They completely reject what the electorate is telling them to do. And there's also bits and pieces of the election review that are being revealed, and that's the review being prepared by Nick Minchin and Prue Goward, and that full report will be revealed in December. But essentially, it doesn't matter when that report is released. They'll probably receive this review telling them exactly where they went wrong at the last election and telling them exactly what they need to do to win the next election. They'll read it, ignore it, chuck it in the bin and continue to make themselves more unelectable.
Nick Minchin is the cockroach that won't be flushed, to put two. And Prue Goward's not much better. These are dinosaurs, even if it's a good report. Minchin did more damage to the Liberal Party by installing Tony Abbott as leader of the opposition, or leader of the Liberal Party and hence leader of the opposition, giving us, 10 wasted years of inept governance of which Tony
It was
Abbott...
only 9 wasted years, Dave.
9 wasted years.
It was only 9 wasted years. I know it felt like a lot more than that, but it was only 9 wasted years. That's good to know.
Yeah, of which Tony Abbott was only about 2.5 years of that, showing Minchin's political nous. The Liberal Party has to purge the federal right, who all they want to do is get into power. When they've got it, don't know what to do with it. It's like the old joke about the lady asked if she's worried about her older husband trying to chat up younger females, and she said, no, it's like the dog chasing the car. What's he going to do with them when he catches it? And that's the feral right. I know Wilson is seen to be a moderate, but he's really part of that faction. The wreckers. And they can stop things and they can break things and they can't do anything. But when they're required to do something, they fail at it consistently. It's, again, Suzanne Lee had an impossible job, or she's not gone yet. She might be gone by the time this is released, but she has an impossible job. She has to try, in the eyes of her party, to have the party back to being electable by the next election. That can't be done. Nobody could do that. Robert Menzies, Alfred Deakin and Joe Lyons, all wrapped together, couldn't do that. Looking at pre-Howard successful leaders, which is where the party is being told it needs to go, back to the Deaconite approach to things rather than the neoliberal approach to things. If Tim Wilson is the answer to the question, and the question isn't who is the most inept, inappropriate member of parliament, you've got the wrong question, and you've certainly got the wrong answer. And Angus Taylor, I think what we've discovered about Angus Taylor is that he is the great genius, provided you ignore the fact that he is as thick as 2 planks.
But I think even before we get to the leadership issue or the potential challenges, if it actually gets to that, it's still hard to believe that in 2025 we're still debating, or the Liberal Party is still debating, net zero emissions. And for 2 reasons. It's a debate that seems to have already been decided. Something like 2/3 of the electorate supports it. And I think that for a lot of people, it's still a little bit of an abstract concept because it's dealing with something that's 25 years away. And the other point is that every single advanced economy in the world has already committed to this in varying degrees and various methods. And 6 months after an absolutely massive election defeat, the worst in political history or federal political history, you'd think that the Liberal Party might have just learned something. And during the week, we had a newbie senator from South Australia, Leah Blythe, saying this.
Do you personally support your party maintaining its commitment to net zero by 2050?
Personally, I don't. I think that net zero isn't working for the Australian people. The economics of it and even the environmental impact that net zero will have just doesn't add up, I don't think, in our national interests.
But she doesn't explain why it's not working, what that actually means, or why the economics doesn't stack up. She just comes out and says it. And she's from the Conservative part of the South Australian Liberal Party. So the party voted to dump net zero. 28 members of the Liberal Party room voted to dump it. 17 members wanted to keep it, and 4 members weren't so sure. I'm not sure what you're doing there if you're not so sure about this. So that's 28 members of the Liberal Party who do not want to win the next election, or the one after that, or the one after that as well. And yet again, energy policy is going to destroy the Liberal Party, and I think it's thoroughly deserved.
The argument or the suggestion is that they're so reliant on support from the big coal that they want nuclear because it'll take 35 to 40 years to install. And they know that it's not viable, but it keeps coal. While we do this, we'll have to maintain the status quo. Net zero, it's bad because it removes the reliance on coal. Now, how true this is, I will leave up to you, dear listener. But I think there's an element of truth in there because it's those factions that are most aligned to coal who are pushing, we've got to dump this policy, even though they lost colleagues and friends. I put it in that order because I think that's the order they all put it in. To Teal candidates who are saying, we agree with the Liberal Party to here, but after that, we disagree. Treatment of women and environment. And what they haven't realised, what takes them a long time to absorb, is that it was a majority of people in those seats who said, yes, we agree with the Liberal Party to this point, but after this point, we cannot vote for these people in good conscience. We're worried about our children, we're worried about our grandchildren, we're worried about our future. We have, in some expensive seaside houses that we wish to preserve. In some cases, we are genuinely worried about the future of the world and we don't want to see that mass. And it doesn't matter why. It does matter that the electorate thinks that. Now, you either have to try and talk your electorate back into it, and there's been very little cut through, as the PR guys say. People are very worried, and it stops being a partisan thing, and it's become a thing from the nation. That most Australians think that cutting our carbon footprint so that it is net zero, and it's a problematic term, shouldn't we cut it all together rather than push it around so we're not, somebody else is churning out the carbon, but we're not. But that's the problem. And the right refuse to believe that they're not with the majority of Australians. Now, fortunately, they haven't gone down the Trump road of it was rigged.
I'll give them time. They'll get there.
They'll get there. But certainly there's this cognitive dissonance between this is what we want, this is what the people of Australia want, but if we keep pushing this, the people of Australia will vote for us.
Well, it's just really dumb politics as well. And there's a lot that's going wrong with the Liberal Party at the moment. It's disorganised, there's infighting, there's no clear sense of direction. And it's actually been taken over by a conservative religious cabal as well. And when you've got a rump in Parliament, the chances of being taken over by a particular group just becomes a lot easier. And I think it's actually reached a point where the party is more focused on surviving as a party than actually winning an election. But then you think, well, what is there to save at the moment? And every political party or political movement is going to go through these same types of processes. And the Labor Party's had all of these types of moments throughout its history, but it's just never been as extreme as this. And even during its lower points, the Labor Party always seemed to keep its identity, but the Liberal Party is losing theirs. And every core group within the electorate, except for the over 60s, is just deserting the Liberal Party. And even within that group, it's not solid support. They've lost the Gen Z and millennials. They probably never had those groups anyway. And most of that group, or the Gen Z, they are going to be eligible to vote fully. And I think it's the back end of Gen Z that's going to come in over the next election or two. And these people all support the things that the Liberal Party is opposed to. So this is going to cause problems for them at the next election and the next one and the next one and the next one. That's why I keep saying that they're going to have problems for they've pretty much lost the next 4 or 5 elections. So these are not happy times for the Liberal Party, and I'm not really sure whether it's going to end for them, these unhappy times, but irrespective of who the leader is, whether it's Susan Lee, whether she keeps the job, or whether it's Angus Taylor or Tim Wilson or Andrew Hasey or someone else, it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of things that do need to change, and like Margaret Thatcher said, it seems like the Liberal Party is not for changing, but they do need to change.
They have to. They've got to purge. They've got to purge those agents of chaos who, like Tim Wilson, like Angus Taylor, like the right, who don't actually suggest anything productive or constructive, who are all about opposition, who are all about stopping stuff, who will point to Tony became Prime Minister, without recognising that Tony only lasted not even long enough to get his prime ministerial pension, and left no legacy except a legacy of destruction and pain and awfulness. They need to come to terms with the Australian people rather than themselves. They've got to realise that privilege is something that you can use positively, not use as a bullying and an attacking tactic. They've got to realise that sometimes you can be in the minority and be right, but sometimes you can be in the minority and be absolutely wrong. Democracy, as Churchill was purported to say, is the worst system of parliament ever devised, except for everything else. And yeah, they've got to stop pre-selecting inappropriate people. They've got to stop listening to Sky News. They've got to get out there and actually listen to the core. Find the new forgotten people. Who is it? We can't really talk about the middle class anymore. We can't talk about the working class anymore. Not really. And the elite, the upper echelon, don't need your help. They will cope just fine with their money and resources. And God bless all of them, don't get me wrong. But you've got to get the centre. And on their current policies, they're not even getting all the right. And this is where another party forms. And yes, you need big money for a party to form, sure. But there are people with big money who are quite happy to see the current status quo go down, either in a good way or a bad way. And if you are a genuine, passionate supporter of the Liberal Party, I'd be very worried because it could be on its way out. At best, I think there's going to be a massive split, which will probably push it out of opposition and into minority party status. That vacuum will be filled, but with what, I don't know.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.